नमस्कार, इंडिया डिबेट में आप सबका स्वागत है। मैं हूं आशुतोष पाठक। मित्रों, हम ग्लोबल गवर्नेंस, WHO, यूनाइटेड नेशन, वर्ल्ड बैंक, इसको समझने की कोशिश लगातार करते रहे हैं। इन तीनों के बीच में एक खास तरह का रिश्ता है। वर्ल्ड वॉर सेकंड के बाद इस तीनों ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की भूमिका, पेंडेमिक के बाद इन तीनों ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने क्या रोल प्ले किया है, वर्ल्ड बैंक ने क्या किया, यूनाइटेड नेशन ने क्या किया और अब WHO क्या कर रहा है, WHO की क्या क्या कारगुजारियां हैं। आज इस मुद्दे, हम तो आपको इस बारे में अक्सर बताते रहे हैं, लेकिन आज मैं आपको एक ऐसे शख्स के पास ले जा रहा हूं जो आपको बहुत विस्तार में इन सब के नेपथ्य में चलने वाले WHO, वर्ल्ड बैंक और यूनाइटेड नेशन के बीच में रिश्ता क्या है, इसके बारे में बहुत विस्तार से बताएंगे। हालांकि ये इंटरव्यू अंग्रेजी में होगा, फुल इंटरव्यू अंग्रेजी में होगा, लेकिन हम कोशिश करेंगे बीच बीच में उसको एक्सप्लेन करने की हिंदी में कि उन्होंने क्या कहा है, हमारा सवाल क्या था। तो अब लेकिन आप ध्यान से उसको सुनिए, थोड़ा सा लंबा होगा। हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि इस पूरे इंटरव्यू को आप एंजॉय करेंगे। और मैं जिस शख्स से आपको मिलाने जा रहा हूं वो टेक्सास, यूनाइटेड स्टेट ऑफ अमेरिका में, अमेरिका से जुड़ रहे हैं। हम सीधे उनके पास चलते हैं। स्वागत करते हैं अपने माइकल टी क्लार्क का। वेरी वार्म वेलकम टू क्यूआईप नेटवर्क। माइकल, आई वॉज जस्ट introducing you in Hindi for my Hindi viewers, but now I will start asking you all the things, all the question in English only, and I will explain it in Hindi also. So very warm welcome to QIP Network. For the first time, Michael T. Clark is appearing on my show. So let me introduce my darshak that who is Michael Clark. Michael T. Clark is a specialist in political economy of international relations. He has held a variety of positions in international diplomacy, business, research, and the international civil service, including more than 9 years as senior coordinator for governance and policy at the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. He earned his Bachelor of Arts at Harvard and Master of MA and PhD at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. This is the brief of Michael Clark, but he is beyond all these. He's a very smart global governance expert, and he has been doing a tireless work to understand what is WHO and how this WHO is functioning before COVID-19 and after COVID-19, what are the agenda of WHO and what is the relationship between WHO and World Bank and United Nations? What is the meaning of global governance, global finance? Who are the players who are willing to capture the whole world through these agencies and who have already captured these agencies? We are going to discuss on these issues. So my first question would be, Michael T. Clark, that please you brief something about yourself, your experience, your relationship with India. And let me tell you that you have been the head of the Indo-US Business Council also. So can you please brief yourself to my Hindi viewers in India? Yeah.
Yes. Let me just put it very succinctly. I have worked throughout my career, whether as a researcher or development economist or what have you, focused really on, when I say the political economy, particularly on North-South relations. And I have lived that experience working on debt issues in the 1980s. This is a major focus of mine. Family is from Nicaragua, and in very high positions there, including foreign minister for 11 years, my mother's brother, and have worked, as you mentioned, in the thick of it, at the peak of globalization, from 1998 to 2004, and the whole transition that took place within India. I was privileged to be a part of that, and then invited to be CEO of India's largest network engineering firm, which gave me a very hands-on experience for understanding the real challenges that Indian businesses face working in a global market. I went from there with some transitions to the UN at the request of my then uncle, and was put in charge of the UN conference on the financial and economic crisis in 2008-9. And I think we produced one of the best documents. In that, I'm happy to say we had the support of 20-some very extraordinary human beings and experts in finance. From a very critical perspective, it was chaired by Joseph Stiglitz, but included the leading lights like Y.V. Reddy from India and counterparts from many other countries. I went through, I was invited then to stay at the UN, worked with UNCTAD, and then with FAO, as you mentioned. And I have recently retired and found out that I am a specialist in global, in the political economy of globalization and of global governance, and that this is something that needs much more focus and attention. Thank you.
Okay, now we should start the hot discussion.
Okay.
What is the mood in US, sir, after the congressional hearing of Anthony Fauci and the EcoHealth Alliance Chairman, Dr. Peter Daszak? What is the mood in US?
I think the mood is shifting. We had until very recently, and before the hearings, extremely partisan division. And I see cracks forming there. And I see Republicans like the chairman being very responsible and careful in putting evidence together and challenging, also very tough. And I see some Democrats recognizing that there has been some abuse. They don't understand how far it goes. But even Fauci says he has to keep an open mind on some very basic questions, including the very fraught question of the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So what we saw in congressional hearing, Democrats are really want to save Anthony Fauci. What is the logic behind this? Because they think that this fire will go to Biden, and it will go to the White House also.
Well, inevitably it will, and that's a very strong motive for Democrats to fight tooth and nail to resist the evidence. But the evidence is accumulating, and it's really reached in the expert community well beyond any partisan divide. And I would say that the preponderance of evidence today, particularly, is about leans toward the engineering side of the question rather than the natural zoonotic transmission, and that this is the beginning of the unraveling of a story.
So the empire of Biden is going to collapse? Do you think so in the coming election? It has become the election issue?
It has not yet become the election issue. I think inflation is the election issue. And they are very reluctant to trace the inflation back to the huge amount of money they poured into the US and by extension into the global economy over the last 4 or 5 years. And the massive deficits run up under Trump. I think they're both very vulnerable on this question, and they will do everything they can to avoid discussing it.
Okay. Who are the key players in the world, sir, who are willing to capture these organizations like WHO and World Bank, or they have already captured? Who are the key players? Would you like to name any of these? or you just explain? You want to explain in a theoretical manner, or my pointed question is that who are the key players? Means the institution, any private institution, or any private players, any
Yes.
corporate or deep states?
I think that in this case, there have been a group of people centered in the pharmaceutical industry, people who are heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry, and people who are invested in the vaccine approach to managing epidemic diseases, outbreaks. And for a mixture of motives, I think it's naive to exclude the possibility that there's money to be made in vaccines, and that's why there is a huge push to move away from more traditional approaches to public health, to privatizing and then financializing the public health response. And it's not a conspiracy theory to go on TED and see there's Bill Gates promoting this, putting billions of dollars, investing his own money into all pharmaceutical and the vaccine stuff. And I think in the case of the U.S. National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases and its longtime leader, 40 years as director, this is almost unprecedented. It's like J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI kind of thing. This goes to your head. This leads to distortions. This means that, whenever you see a problem, you see it through a very clear lens. In reality, it's never quite that way.
But the problem is, Michael, the evidence is very much in public domain. There is no rocket science to understand what is the role of Bill Gates. Everybody is knowing the role of Bill Gates. In 2000, Bill Gates established the Gates and Melinda Foundation.
Yes,
and after that, they started investing in all the big pharma company. And then they started this kind of thing. Then the Ebola came, then the H1 came. And he was very much prominent in all these so-called epidemic. I'm not saying they wanted to create epidemic as pandemic, but after 2000, these came out. So there should be a direct conflict of interest, or there should be a direct link between these kind of diseases outbreak and the research funded by Bill Gates Foundation is clearly showing that there is a relationship, not should be, there is a relationship between the both. So why American government is so reluctant to investigate Bill Gates? Why? Or has he captured the American institution, in fact?
No, this is coming. I think this is very much coming. What you have to understand and appreciate is that, and it's not only in the US, but very much in the US, there was immense prestige, intellectual prestige, associated with the people and the offices who were involved. Okay. And what we're going through is really a disillusionment with what people believed was the way the world worked. Okay. And what you hear Democrats doing is clinging to an understanding, and it's a very emotional attachment that they have to the whole mythology that Fauci and others constructed for themselves. Okay, we don't have to assume that it was greed and distortion to say that there was greed and distortion as part of it. These were reinforcing factors. But they wanted science to lead, and the science was moving in the direction of vaccine research and mRNA and all of that. And where they went off was in interpreting events of the last 20 or 30 years as demonstrating a movement toward growing outbreaks and increasing frequency, caseloads, and lethality of pandemics. Okay, and it became just an assumption. You often hear people say, "But everybody knows this." Okay, and what they did was they monopolized. And monopoly is the problem, and the problem
No,
of
because see, Michael, when I had the conversation with American National, he said, yes, everybody knows here in India, in US, the role of Bill Gates. When I asked that, then why you people are keeping mum? Why you're not coming out in against of Bill Gates?
So let me
Who
speak
stops you?
Let me speak to that point. Okay, they know what Bill Gates has been doing. All right, what they didn't know and are slowly coming to understand is he was dead wrong about what was going on. Okay, all these new viruses that were being discovered was the product not of emergence or accelerated emergence owing to climate change or anything else. It was the product of the development of national health systems, extending their outreach, and a revolution that took place in testing, right? We had PCR, we had the serology, we had now genetic sequencing, others. And so as they got better and better, they identified more and more of these diseases, most of which are not going to be able to, by any natural cause, become pandemics. They will be endemic. And most of which, if you exclude COVID, which is an exception, were not capable of producing a global pandemic because they were so lethal and because their transmissibility was fairly low. And this is the case even now with the bird flu and the other viruses that they're talking about. Okay, so where did this hysteria come from about the big pandemic coming? It was manufactured. Okay, and you've pointed to the man who did more than anybody else to manufacture this view. Okay, but so people know that he was advocating for this. This is not a secret, and that's why I say it's not a conspiracy to say that he did that. All right, he saw that, and he also put his money behind it. All right, so people can look at the facts and say, yeah, but if you see that and you think government is not responding and you're putting your own money in and you see new technology emerging, Bill Gates knows technology, he knows what he's doing, this is all okay. So the disillusionment has to reach the point that people connect that fact with the evidence that, wait a minute, this whole thing with COVID was massively overblown. They took the wrong policy response. They created a huge problem and they want to blame it all on the pandemic. All right, they want to.
No, sorry to stop you. I want to know that these liars from Democrat, who are to any extent who are willing to save this Anthony Fauci and other people, it clearly shows there are evidences against these frauds, against these thugs. Even then, Democrats are protecting. I don't know why. Why Americans are not agitated? Why Americans are not coming on the street? I have seen some agitation in 2021, but from then I haven't seen any agitation. Can you please brief us that if any agitation took place in the near past? Can you please tell us?
Yes, there's been some agitation in the U.S. and very recently. Okay, I came to this subject at the invitation of Dr. Meryl Nass, who is a leading person in promoting this kind of work. They've been suppressed very actively, particularly by the Biden administration. People lost their licenses. Dr. McCullough would have probably talked to you about that. Okay, they've been deplatformed from social media. They've been barred. If you talk to American elites, okay, there is a litmus test for whether you are a rational person or not, okay? If you think there is any problem with vaccines, you are an irrational person. You don't believe in science. You don't adhere to truth. Frankly, there's nothing evil enough that could be done to you to stop you. And so this has been very effective.
They fabricated the narrative of anti-vaxxer, crackpots, which you are saying in article, the crackpots. They fabricated all kind of narratives against those who at least questioned the narrative made by them. So they thought that everybody, if anyone is asking question Anthony Fauci, they are against science. Anthony Fauci is clearly saying that I am the science.
Yes.
I don't know why. So we here in India, people want to know that what is the conflict of interest Biden administration and Democrats with pharma. I know that the Republicans are also hand in glove to some extent. They got the election funding also. When I was researching the funding patterns, pharma premises funded Republican and Democrats almost equally. So I'm not taking part of Republican, but what I'm trying to just convey you that why Democrats are protecting Anthony Fauci and pushing the narrative of vaccine and other medical protocol. Why?
Look, the challenge here is that this process of disillusionment took years to build, and it will take years to unwind. Okay? Yes, we have the facts. Yes, the evidence is really quite damning. All right? But very few people know it. Okay? The issue of what happened at WHO probably made more news in the US than anything from the UN in a long time. Okay? I was surprised to see. I don't watch local news, but one night I turned it on and quite randomly, they were doing stories on this battle. It was, of course, being presented as a battle between the enlightened advocates of the policies that we had and the people that we hear described as providing misinformation and disinformation, engaging in conspiracy theories, crackpots, and the rest. This is how they did that. I think that when we get past the election, and this has been the pattern on other policy issues.
So who will do the indemnification, sir? Who?
Obviously, the public will in the U.S. They will not bear the
Facebook did the wrong, Google did the wrong, and all social media platform and all media premises gone against the narrative which the scientists were raising.
Yes. Well, we like to point out that in China, they accommodated the Chinese government, but in the U.S., they accommodated the U.S. government for the same rationale and the same reason. So we have a problem, okay? Our democracy is deeply flawed. It has been captured by these large, well-heeled institutions. It's very hard. I can tell you, I spent a couple of months with the Robert Kennedy campaign. It is very hard to take on the big parties with the amount of money they can use to dominate the media. So for all of that, it's a real challenge, but the paradigm is shifting. Okay, I can say that as someone 67 years old who's been around American politics most of my adult life. We've seen a full cycle since the Reagan era, which led to globalization and market-based and the whole ideology. That ideology has unraveled quite a bit. It's still being contested.
So paradigm shifts towards Republican? Are you saying like this?
It's not the Republican Party you knew. Okay, it's not the Republican Party of the major corporates. It is a different Republican Party, much more populist, much more willing to challenge the orthodoxy.
Okay, so hegemony of corporates, the people are just waking up against corporates. Are you saying like this? The big pharma company people are now started realizing the fact that who these pharma premises are and how they are controlling the institution and the government agencies too.
Yes, and they're very angry. But the problem is so big and so deep that people struggle to find hope. Okay, but this is the process. This is our satyagraha, if you will.
Now, let me ask you a very pointed question. The role of WHO. now WHO is preparing, already has prepared WHO, that international health regulation. And they are planning it would be signed, and that would be legally binding for every member states. So what is your view, that will WHO succeed in this sign campaign, or even US? What is the stand of US? Because I have seen that United Kingdom, England has refused to sign, and there are European states also, and even Australia. There is a great resentment in Japan, Australia, Germany, France too. So what is the stand of US on IHR of WHO?
The US was the leading demandeur as they say in French, of the regulations in 2005, which created this power of the Director General to declare a pandemic emergency of health emergency of international concern, a state of exception. We'll talk more about that maybe, but and then decided that they had to fight misinformation and disinformation. They had to strengthen somehow WHO, and they pushed a whole bunch of changes. Okay. And the resistance came from the developing countries, particularly the experience of India and South Africa on resisting, trying to get the TRIPS implementation, very big deal. So I think that the status is that as long as Biden is there, they will fight for it. But they've agreed to postpone until a year a vote on the pandemic treaty, and they have adopted something very unusual for the IHRs. Okay, they're allowing countries to decide whether to adhere or not. So it's turning the IHRs from a legally binding instrument applicable to everyone to something more like a protocol, which is only for those who agree to do it. So what's happening is that you have to understand how the power of WHO works. Okay, it's like the Wizard of Oz. There's a man behind the curtain, and then creating a great idea that there is this powerful institution. Okay, this institution is its total funding of even $5 or $6 billion is about what a mid-sized hospital, major hospital in a mid-sized town in the U.S. would be. One hospital, okay, against a $4.3 trillion health industry. Okay, this is a point in a system, not even a space to talk about. And so what's happened is the capture of WHO allowed a certain point of view held by the people we've been talking about to dominate, to present itself through tremendous pressure put on the Director General as the voice of the world. Okay, and we can dissect the way this happened and the way it actually works. But what's happening is that there's a medical doctor from Australia who's had a lot of very important things to say about this pandemic response, David Bell, and he calls it the epistemic authority of the WHO, the epistemic authority. Okay, that's the prestige of the knowledge that we expect these global institutions to have, the objectivity and independence that we expect them to have, the authority of having a view of the world as a whole, and recognizing that things are different in different places, the way diseases will impact is going to be different. We expect them to have all of that, and it didn't happen. Okay, probably we're going to find out that the approach that was taken in the U.S., it certainly on objective measures was the least successful in the world. Okay, the highest rate of mortality in the world, despite everything that they did. So we see an erosion taking place of the credibility and authority. They have no military capacity to impose their will. It only worked if the sovereigns believed that this is what was best for them. And I think this has been destroyed. And it's a very, very dangerous thing. But let me stop talking.
So, Michael, so these globalist monopolists, in fact, they already captured the WHO. And now through WHO, they want to establish a new imperial era. So, see, the developing countries have been under the rule of imperial state like UK. And so now these new monopolists want to capture again the sovereign government. So as you written in your article that the sovereign is he who decides if you define the same,
The
who decides the
state of exception.
Exception. Yes.
Yes, the exception.
Yes, right. So where will be the sovereignty of the state when this international health regulation will be signed by the member states, which is legally binding, in which WHO Director General will have the capacity to enforce any kind of their wish that this is the outbreak of international concern. They can say that this epidemic looks like it is the national concern, the local concern, then it will become the international concern. So anything they can do, and they have already done it in the past. During COVID period, they have done it. They have tested it.
Yes.
So can you imagine that even the vaccine manufacturer? Yeah. Okay. You want to say something?
Yeah. No, well, I'm going with you. Okay. You asked me a question. What is state sovereignty then, if this is the case? All right.
Right.
And it's a subtle question, but I can approach it from two sides. Give me just a second. From one, we formed these organizations not to become a global government, okay?
Right.
But a facility for coordinating action, okay, at the national level by the sovereigns, okay? Now, the mistake was made, and this is something I think public health experts are particularly prone to, but it's very dangerous to democracy and it's very dangerous to good governance. And that is to say, no, this is a technical decision, a decision that can only be left in the hands of experts. All right. But what you know from political experience in all time, okay, is that for whatever reason that you create a dictator, and there were the position of dictator existed in Rome, it existed in most legal systems. And that's where this objective statement is: whoever is sovereign is the person who decides the exception. Okay.
Right.
Normal rules. So this is what they did. And this completely goes against the understanding of what international relations and international organizations are for. And that is not to create a sovereign above the members, but to create institutions that facilitate the active decision-making of the member states, okay? I know of no other case. Look at the Security Council of the UN. We don't let the Secretary General decide whether there should be war, okay?
Yes.
Okay, there are many deficiencies in the institutional arrangements of that.
They don't care the member states' feeling or their opinion.
No, so they wanted to, and you can see then this plays into the narrative, this plays into the capture, this plays into the desire even now to add to the IHRs, and it's in the new IHRs, training for all countries on how to control misinformation and disinformation. What is misinformation? It's not information that's wrong, it's information that's inconvenient. All right. It's what they argue is that, listen, we're fighting this great virus. We can't have these arguments now. We can have them later, but we never have them then. And they should have listened. They should have taken a deep breath and said, okay, what are we really facing here? But to come back to it, so sovereignty severely compromised in this kind of a structure. Okay, and the almost universal experience, throughout history, when you create this kind of a structure, okay, is you end up with the negative view of what a dictatorship is. Okay,
so Michael, I'm giving you one example of a congressional hearing of Anthony Fauci. Democrats were asking and saying that, see, you have served the country for last 40 years, you have a very great track record, and they were only praising Anthony Fauci. They were not asking the evidence. They were not asking the emails between the stakeholders, exchange of emails. When the Republicans were giving the facts, they were just saying that, no, your service has been great for the country. So this kind of and I cannot say that this kind of argument Democrat is building to protect Anthony Fauci. What will happen in US, sir? Forget about the sovereignty of respective states and other member states of WHO. The facts which is coming out in front of American administration and the party which is in power, they are trying to protect their evil. Why?
I recall the remark of Winston Churchill to the effect, you can trust the Americans to do the right thing, but not until they've tried everything else. Okay. So,
oh, great things.
So
fantastic.
I believe that the democratic process is working now. It was not working before.
Right.
I believe that we are in an election year. You have just gone through this with some interesting results. And I think that no one can really predict what's going to come out, but I can assure you that whichever party wins, there will be a reckoning over these issues. Okay?
It's very good. Very good. I'm hoping so. Sir. Now, can you put some light on World Bank behavior? Because we have already discussed too much the behavior of WHO, but World Bank behavior, how World Bank is behaving nowadays. This organization is also trying to control the world, the global finance through a global governance kind of a misinformation and nomenclature.
So we've had a lot more experience with the World Bank and its deep involvement in structural adjustment, the penalizing of countries for having taken on debt and then suffering for that. And so, one thing that the World Bank is always looking for is a new mandate, a new area to get into, because it's, once vaunted reputation as having the world's experts in how to manage development and processes. This all turned out to be completely wrong. Their structural adjustment plans killed growth in all the countries that it was implemented in. They moved to good governance, which was a way of blaming the countries for their failures. And good governance turned out to be a huge waste of money, for which many countries incurred debt, thinking that they would become more efficient in the management of government. And so what slowly happened was developing countries said, I'm not going to depend on them. I remember very famously, YV Reddy prohibited anyone from the World Bank to come on the premises of the RBI anywhere in India. Okay? And he said, I don't want those people anywhere around us. They pollute minds and they. The other thing about the World Bank is that if you've ever had to work with them, okay, they take over and they impose their own ideas on whatever it is. I've seen this from the FAO vantage point, where they have a certain view of how agriculture should change in the world, should become industrialized, which would be a catastrophe if it were done in Africa. leave hundreds of millions unemployed and the rest. But if you go to their webpage, maybe it's changed now, but when I went to it, it said, our job is to help countries get out of agriculture. So I think that they have no special knowledge of economics. And now they want to say they have special, they will acquire the expertise. This is in their papers to the G20, expertise that's needed to play the accountability role for the WHO. How does that work? Okay. The core of this treaty and the IHR amendments is a deal. They want to create a global surveillance, pandemic, surveillance, response, prevention,
Right.
mechanisms, PPR, prevention, preparedness, and response, to the tune of, in 5 years, $155 billion. Okay? They want most of that to be paid for by the countries themselves. And the illusion that many people have is that the World Bank brings you money, okay? The World Bank brings you loans, okay? So even what they finance, mostly, there's IDA is an exception, and there's a concessionary part of it that's worth something. But it's your public money, okay? You have to pay that back. And the thing about the World Bank is that people pay the World Bank, all right? I once heard someone say, from an OECD government, finance ministry say, the reason the World Bank can give money at such low rates is because we lenders support that. And the answer to that is, since when is the quality of debt dependent on the status of the lenders? Okay, it's on the borrowers, and because the borrowers pay. And why do they pay the World Bank? Not because the loans are good. They have no exceptional performance on their loans, okay? If you took out good governance loans, you just wasted your money. But because politically, you don't fight the World Bank, okay? This will lead you excluded in many ways. And it's tied to your reputation for private finance and other areas. So this is what it means to have the World Bank come in to an area they don't know anything about and start to take over, and then hold countries accountable for performance for the money. Okay, how do they hold them accountable? Look, they get you addicted to these loans, and they want to keep rolling over the loans. If you don't do what they say, they're good advice, then you won't get the loans. And this has been the experience everywhere else, and this is what's on the table now.
So, Michael, are you of this view that these all organizations which I mentioned, the UN and WHO and the World Bank, they are completely under the influence of globalist monopolist rather than the states, rather than the government of the respective states? In fact, these people have already captured all these organizations. There is a great influence of these monopolists. Would you agree?
I would agree. I would say, if you want to know who runs WHO, follow the money, and you'll see even the so-called directed money, or the money that comes as part of an assessed contribution, as a UN formula. That's overwhelmingly by wealthy countries, okay? Add to that the 85, 86% that comes from donors, again, from good countries, and overwhelmingly from the pharma and vaccine community, and that same cabal of people, that you would be shocked to think it could have turned out any other way. Okay, now, I don't give up, because as we saw in the negotiation of the pandemic treaty, which is not done and probably will never get done, as more evidence and information comes out They will be too embarrassed to go with that agenda. And the IHRs were watered down to a bare minimum, still slightly dangerous. There needs to be a rethinking there. But the countries don't have to accept it. And so what they're ending up with is a very substantial weakening of WHO because they overreached. There's one thing I want to make very clear. I think it's a fundamental for all the reasons we're talking about. It's a wrong construction to say this was a power grab by WHO. It was a power grab of WHO, and the sovereigns have the ability to say no, and they have said no. There's this old saying with diplomats: if a diplomat says yes, they mean maybe. If they say maybe, they mean no, and if they say no, they're not diplomats. So here you have the thing that this is the pretty strong no.
So may not, or no? What would WHO would like to listen from the member state like India? Because we are pressurizing every now and then that the government should not sign any IHR of WHO. WHO treaty is far away from the imagination of Indian government. I think so, but there are people, there are mole of Bill Gates and Gates Foundation who are also infiltrated in our system too. So we are keeping eye on those people also. But do you think that the US will say that this should not be signed? I think that it has come through US itself. So they want to, it has to be signed by the member states. What is going to be the stand of US on WHO treaty?
So there's a very important question here. All right. The US has made a lot of noise that they want the pandemic treaty to be called an agreement. Okay. Under international law, this is not really a valid distinction, but why is it so important to the US? All right. And the reason it's important in the US is that if it's called an agreement, it's really an executive agreement. Okay, so that has no legal status on US law. Okay, it doesn't obligate the US internally. It is an expression of the administration of the day, the Biden administration now. Okay, it would not apply to a successor administration. If they wanted to change it, they would just walk away from it. Okay, that's an excessive privilege for one country in the world, the United States. Now, there was a letter signed by 49 Republican senators. This is one manifestation of the campaign that you asked me about earlier. Is there agitation? Is there resistance in the US? And so these Republican senators said, if this comes to the US, we think it should be regarded as a treaty. A treaty requires 2/3 vote of the Senate. They have 49 votes, they would kill it. Okay, if it were regarded as a treaty. So there will be some argument and fighting over this. But I think that, as I say, the epistemic authority, the prestige of WHO has been seriously crippled by this process. To fix WHO, you will have to change the way it's funded and everything else. Or at least have much more transparency. The first thing that has to happen, though, is truth finding. And those facts need to be plain to everybody that we've been talking about. And we can move in that direction, I think, only really after the elections.
Some information, I came to know that there is a provision in WHO treaty. Suppose any member state has not signed or even not willing to sign. And if their representative present in the committee where the treaty is going to be finalized and they have not signed, and if they are present only, that would be considered that it is signed. Is it there?
That would be extremely unusual. I will need to see. I think that could only be counted as an abstention, not as a positive vote. But that's a very arcane rule and very unusual rule if it does exist at WHO. It's completely at odds with the point of sovereignty. So there can be lots of different ways that countries agree to a treaty. If they have a king or they have a sovereign in that nature, it may be just on the authority of that one person. If they have a parliamentary democracy, then the parliament or the Senate needs to advise and consent to the treaty, and these are internal legal questions. All right, but I don't think it makes a difference if you're present and you don't vote. But it would have to be an authoritative letter from the capital, documented and registered with either at WHO or with the Secretary General of the UN in New York after a given date, for this sort of thing to happen. What's happening though is a different process. They like to do IHRs by consensus, okay, which is no vote. Theoretically, any single state could object, okay? But we saw, for example, at the Paris Agreement, poor Nicaragua was objecting to the agreement. The delegate was standing on the table. He's a big man, Paul Oquist, waving his arms, shouting at the top of his lungs, and the chair pretended not to see him, and said, "We have consensus," and gavelled it through. They do not want a roll call vote because it would clearly not be by consensus.
Okay, so Michael, any legally binding treaty, India is not going to sign. And if in somehow this mole like Bill Gates and their foundation, if they are trying to influence our government system and somehow suppose that this information came in public domain that India has signed the WHO treaty in the same manner, which is legally binding, I think that we are not going to allow them. But what US will do, we are just keeping eye on US, that what US is going to sign or not. What is your hunch?
Well, on the IHRs, I'm pretty sure that the Biden administration will sign, because it's their IHRs. All right,
Their idea. Yeah,
they could make the position that okay, but the question is, one, it won't be binding on the U.S.
Right.
Okay.
Because they have guarded themselves.
From standpoint of international law, it is formally binding, all right, but there is no enforcement mechanism, okay? And from a standpoint of U.S. domestic law, it's not binding, so they can't use it. And this is what the sovereignty movement, the medical freedom and sovereignty movement was about, was to say, you can't throw away our Constitution in Geneva, all right? And this creates a double standard. Where the U.S. can say, well, we commit to the agreement, and this is legally binding for everyone. It's legally binding us. That's not true, and I think you erode confidence in these institutions.
So, what is your message? Lastly, my last question is: what is your message to the rest of the world, that they should always be alert that what is going on? Because this WHO and World Bank is completely controlled by a globalist monopolist. So we should always in alert mode, that what both the organization is doing. What is your message?
My message is, yes, we need, I think, these global institutions, but not the ones we have today. If you simply destroy them, you will not build new ones. They're very, very hard to build. It's not for nothing that they came out of World War II and a moment in which there was a commitment to trying to change the way the world interacts. But I think the sovereign states need to think hard about how these institutions should work. They should recognize that if they want to change the institution, they have to change the way it's funded. That relying on philanthropists with agendas turns out to be a terrible idea. They should recognize that the burden of funding will fall on themselves, so they should take ownership and reassert sovereignty in the processes, especially in the process of declaring a pandemic. They should debate it. They should be prepared. They should see these institutions as institutions to enable collective action. My view of it is this, Ashutosh. The reason we have UN is to make states more effective, not to create a government over them. Okay. And how do we make states more effective? Okay. We start by telling the truth about what we know. Okay. We get very good at putting inconvenient facts also in front of people. Okay. We have to recognize that science is always changing. Okay. That it's open and it's always contested. This idea that there is the science and there's this, no. We have to recognize that collecting evidence and sharing it while protecting basic human rights regarding identity and that. But this is an important thing. It can be very difficult to get to, but we know that the system we have is completely broken.
So you're saying that with open mind, we have to be careful that our sovereignty should not be snatched by any individual or any institution in the name of savior of the humanity. And as you said, that the science is something that every day, every now and then it is changing, and we have to be in the side of science. We should not be in the side of misinformation, disinformation, as they were saying that whosoever is making question, asking question, they will be considered as anti-science, anti-vaxxer, anti-things. And so they have labeled in many things. But it's been a fantastic talk with you, Michael. Thank you very much for being with us. And I am highly obliged. And someday we'll also join on financial issues, global governance. Today, largely, we talked on WHO functioning, a little bit World Bank functioning, but surely because you are a competent political economist. So therefore, I would certainly talk on politics and on economics too in some day. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. तो ये थे माइकल टी क्लार्क, जिनसे हम बात कर रहे थे, जिन्होंने कहा कि WHO के हेजिमनी को हमें स्वीकार नहीं करना है। WHO को कुछ ग्लोबलिस्ट मोनोपोलिस्ट ने कैप्चर कर लिया है, जो प्राइवेट जो कंपनी है, फार्मा कंपनी है, जो प्राइवेट फिलैंथ्रोपिस्ट हैं, जो फाउंडेशंस हैं, उन्होंने कब्जा किया हुआ है और उसके माध्यम से दुनिया के सोवरेनिटी को, संप्रभुता को खतरा है, दुनिया के अलग अलग देशों के संप्रभुता को खतरा है। इसलिए हमें बहुत ही फोकस रहना पड़ेगा कि ये जो हमारे ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हैं, जो हमारे पॉलिटिशियन हैं, वो इन चीजों को समझें। जो हमारे डिप्लोमेट्स हैं, उनको बहुत अपने आंखों को खोल के रखना पड़ेगा कि इंटरनेशनल जियोपॉलिटिक्स में खुद को कैसे पोजीशन करके रखें और अपने सोवरेनिटी को कैसे बचा करके रखें। तो माइकल क्लार्क से हमारी बातचीत आगे भी रहेगी। आज के लिए इतना ही। आशुतोष को मत दीजिए। नमस्कार।
गन्ने की कड़ी बुनियाद, जिसे मराठी में खुडक्या और कुछ उत्तर भारत के क्षेत्रों में खुटकी भी कहा जाता है, उसे केवल भोलानाथ का 2-in-1 बैटरी ऑपरेटेड हार्वेस्टर कम ब्रश कटर आसानी से और बिना रुकावट के काट सकता है।